work throughout the day. My name is Matt Reichert. I am the Director of Outreach and Engagement for GIA Publications. I also teach at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University here in central Minnesota, and I'm happy to be your host for this event. I will let Jen and Jim introduce themselves in just a minute. Just a couple of ground rules and instructions as the conversation begins. You'll notice attendees and participants at the bottom of your screen. There are a couple of links for you. You'll notice that you have the ability to join in the chat feature, and many of you are saying hello in the chat feature right now. Again, it's a way that you can communicate, you can add thoughts, you can respond to people throughout the conversation today. You'll also notice that there is a Q&A button. So through this feature, you can add questions throughout our conversation today. And we're going to do our best to reserve several minutes at the end of the conversation to get to your questions. But I'll be monitoring the Q&A box. So if you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to go ahead and add that question there. And we'll do our best to get to your question and also to try to answer it. If we don't get to questions, we'll have contact information at the end so we can share that with you. One other thing I'll mention at the end, if you want to go back to rewatch this or you want to share this conversation with anybody else who you know in your community who might benefit from this conversation, we are recording this video and we will make this video available through the GIA's Facebook page, which is easy to find if you go to facebook.com. We'll also be able to email this out to all the participants afterwards. So you will receive a follow-up email after this conversation with the hyperlinks to all the resources that we talk about in this conversation, also with more information about where to find this archive video to share it with others. Okay? If you have any questions, again, through Q&A, that would be wonderful. But right now, let's hear from our panelists. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself to the group first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Matt, for having me. And thanks to GIA. My name is Jenn Fiduccia. I'm the Director of Formation at St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Community in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is about 4,500 family parish. I've been doing ministry in the church for 20 years. I started in music ministry and then went over into youth ministry and finally into all types of catechetical ministry. I have my master's from the University of Dallas in theological studies, currently working towards a second master's in catechetical ministry. I also have a certificate in church management from Villanova and a vocal performance and music business degree from NYU. So kind of all over the map. Really excited to be here, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
That's great. All right, Jim, follow that.
Yeah. Yeah, my name is James Wahl, or Jim. I'm not from New Jersey like Jen. I come from the West Coast originally, from Southern California. Grew up there, ministered there for many years, then spent about 6 years in Phoenix at the cathedral there as the music director. And then I've been here at St. Francis along with Jen. I've been here about 10 years now, so it's a great parish. I did my master's at St. John's in Minnesota through the summers and some strange winters for a California person. But I have my master's in liturgical music composition from there. And I've been with GIA now, well, GIA since December, but World Library for several years, primarily with children's music. And trying to figure out how to continue to form children and bring them in fully, consciously, and actively into the liturgy.
All right, wonderful. So we've heard from our panelists, we've heard a little bit from all of you who are with us, introducing yourselves and where you're from in the chat feature. I am going to launch a poll right now for all of those of you who are participating live, just to get a sense of what brings you to the conversation today. So please feel free to select as many of these roles that suit you as possible. So I'm launching the poll right now to get a sense of, again, the roles that you occupy. So as we have this conversation today, we can try and tailor our conversation as much as possible to those of you who are present. So we know some of you are teachers, many of you, not all of you, are parents or grandparents, some of you are pastors or deacons. So you can select as many of these as you like. We'll leave this poll open here for just a minute as we continue. The goal of the conversation today is to be conversational. We're very intentional with this Homecoming Sunday series to have these be conversations, imagining what is this time when we're able to gather together again. What is it going to be like? What do we do between now and then? How do we imagine what that transition is going to be like? And then also, how are our experiences of domestic church, how are our experiences of our parish or our congregations going to be different? Where are the opportunities? And so we're going to have a conversation today that hopefully addresses as many of those realities as possible. And we'll try to tailor as many practical resources and solutions and steps as possible. So we want to give you some things to think about. We also want to give you some things to consider and take away with you. So I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to vote if you haven't voted in the poll, and then I'm going to end the poll so you can all see who is represented here. We have a nice representation across these roles that we have listed. Of course, we know there might be roles that are not represented here in this poll, so we apologize if there's a particular role that isn't represented here for you, but as close as possible, we'll get a sense of who is here. So I'm going to end the poll, and with 90% of those voting, precincts reporting, here are the results. So you can see again,
wow.
A significant percentage of us are parents. If you look at the catechist, DRE, pastoral musician, a lot of people are involved in pastoral ministry right now, which is wonderful. So again, thank you all for being here and being present and bringing your ministerial gifts. So Jen and Jim, let's jump into the conversation. When we met the other day, we talked a little bit about the sense of realities, or the sense of the way that sort of the rules have changed a little bit right now in terms of how we are raising our children, how we are forming the faith of our families. So what I want to do is maybe begin, Jen, with something you talked about in that initial meeting. And you had a really important message to share right at the beginning, just for everyone who is trying to do their best at home, that if we don't know what to do, we are okay. So I want to turn things over to you to be able to share more about that and to be able to talk more about this reality and where we find ourselves, especially if we're feeling anxious at this time right now.
Absolutely, Matt. I think that one of the most important messages that all of you need to hear, whether you're a parent, a pastor, a minister, a musician, a volunteer, is it is okay to not be okay. These are unprecedented times. I know you've probably heard that more than you care to ever hear again. But no one is trained to do this. Parents are not trained really to work from home while homeschooling. Pastors are not trained to live stream masses. Ministers are not trained to push music virtually. I know music ministers are trying to figure out how to do virtual choirs and things. So my message is, go easy on yourself and love yourself, even a smidgen of the amount that God loves you. This is not easy, and you are not alone. It is okay to not be okay. And one of the things I thought of the other day was when we read the gospel from Sunday of the disciples being locked in the room and being afraid, what they must have been feeling like. Like, we don't have a playbook for this. We saw Jesus crucified and they're afraid. And I think that we could kind of identify with that this is uncharted territory we're in here, and that you are not alone, that you were not trained to be good at this. So don't beat yourself up too much. Don't be too hard on yourself. You're not alone.
Yeah, part of the reason why I wanted to start with that is because, again, like I said, when we were meeting, you expressed that so beautifully, but also I just needed to hear it again. I think we all need to hear it again, that message that, what we're about to talk about is to explore as many of these things as possible, but also knowing that we're all approaching from this place of uncertainty and perhaps even anxiety. And Jim, one of the things that you talked about in this conversation too that we had is, this really is a time of loss and alienation, right? I mean, and I think the way you expressed it is, for a group of people whose experience is built on gathering, we can't do that right now. And that it's okay to name that as something that we lose. And I'm wondering if you would be fine hopping in there and sharing some of your thoughts around that topic as well.
Yeah, and seeing that so many of us that are gathered here today are pastoral musicians, all of our training. So the gold standard is full conscious active participation of the assembly, and the lens that we always look through, of course, is assembly singing, and suddenly that seemingly is stripped away. If you're streaming a liturgy, you're streaming for a camera, and yet there is still an assembly, whether it be virtual or not. And so it does. It in essence, the norms have shifted, and yet our faith is the same, and yet even our goal is the same, that we're still participating. So we are wandering, kind of in different lands. And I think a lot of those scriptural metaphors, of Israel through Lent, Israel wandering through the desert for 40 years, or Jesus is in the desert for 40 days, seemingly just rung out in a new and even truer way this time. Seeing Pope Francis alone, if you will, in the square, there's a strength to that, and yet it's a loss, and to name that, and the fact that children particularly probably will not be able to name that in the same way that we can, and yet they're feeling it, and they don't even necessarily know what they're feeling. Especially, particularly thinking of younger children, before the age of reason, as we call it. Matt, I'm sure you have great observations about the age of reason with young children. They're formed on those images and those experiences, and now that's shifted. And so, how do we come to terms with that?
So I want to thank you for summarizing that again, and I want to jump into that question of how do we do full conscious active participation right now. And I see we have a question from one of our participants about that, and I want to get to that. But first, I want to broaden out a little bit. This question is to the both of you. Just how do we even begin to talk about what's happening right now, just in a broader sense, with children in particular, especially younger children? Not just, why are we attending liturgy differently? Why aren't we able to go to Mass on Sunday? But in general, do you have any tips or advice or considerations for how we approach those conversations with our children?
Yeah, and I think the analogy works well of your voice, the fact that they're not singing along with what is being streamed, if you will, over the TV or the computer, does not mean that it's full. The analogy of a birthday party, if just one person standing there was singing happy birthday, it would feel weird. It's different. It's not normal. It's not, it's still birthday. And yet there is a sense of loss there. So it can't become the norm, and it will not be the norm. And yet, that is what we have right now. So I think to not provide something isn't necessarily a good thing, but to somehow substitute it as this is normal, this is what, and that phrase, the new normal, drives me absolutely nuts, because it's not the new normal. It's just where we are at this moment. So I think, again, and I think it's important with children, if you look at child development, child psychologists, children feel loss, children feel darkness, children. And so we have to acknowledge those feelings. Mr. Rogers did a great job with that always, but acknowledge that this is loss. And yet, how can we continue? And not to say that we can't still try to continue to sing along, if you will, with the TV. I'm not sure if it's happening or not, but we'll hope that it will. So.
Yeah.
So, Matt, can I jump in?
Yeah, please, of course.
I think that, along with what Jim said, telling the children that it's okay to feel what you're feeling, that it's okay to feel angry, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel confused. And I think that this is a great time to go into scripture and into some of the familiar stories. Get your hands on a good children's Bible. St. Mary's Press has a great one, and go read the story of Jesus in the garden when, he was so scared and sad. Read about what did St. Peter do when he was under pressure? He lied. What did other people that, our faith pillars freaked out, and that it's okay for us to freak out because we are human, and that that God is still with us in this always and doesn't abandon us. And I think to tell children it's okay to feel how you're feeling, it's okay to miss church and miss your friends, and even my pre-adolescents, we are dragging them out of bed to go to virtual mass in the morning, and they're still giving us a hard time. So at least that hasn't changed. But to consider how, I would say, to get the kids at least to pay attention, how many times is this word said this Sunday? What colors are there at Mass? What is the priest doing with his hands? What do you see? I think just asking those questions and engaging them, doing a Mass bingo or a Mass scavenger hunt sometimes, it's not ideal and it's not normative, but nothing we're doing is normal right now. So we need new ways.
I want to say real quickly, sorry, Jim, I want to, in the chat feature, I just put a message. You don't have to follow this now, but this is a link to the St. Francis Parish Facebook page. And Jim, I don't know if you want to mention real quickly, if you want to plug the lunchtime programs that you've been doing that are really wonderful, short programs that are meant for children, where you're able to have topic conversations and cover issues like what's happening right now with guests and everybody else. So that link is in the chat feature, but Jim, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with that project?
Yeah, and this came out actually as soon as here in North Carolina, the quarantine hit, we had a meeting after our first Facebook Live with the camera streamed mass that we had in the early days, as we call it now. But and I think it was Jen's idea that we do something for children and families that they can focus around. I mean, I know growing up, I grew up on the Mr. Rogers Sesame Street era. And it was that regularity of that programming was so important, I think, for me, but also I think probably for my mom, looking back, gave her a break. And so that was the idea. Lunch break was as a chance to just stop for a moment, and reflect on our faith and have some fun and sing some songs, but also realize that, this is a catechetical opportunity for us as pastoral associates or pastoral ministers or whatever we are, to teach about the faith, but also to teach about the faith in a time of loss. We just went through the season of Lent through the Paschal Mystery. And if this is not a time that we can talk and experience and engage with the Paschal Mystery with children, then when is another time? And so that's really what it is. It's been a little bit of a shotgun approach to topics. Sometimes we're talking about Mass, sometimes we're talking about the Trinity. St. Patrick's Day popped up on that, so we talked about the Trinity on that day. But so there's the links there on the Facebook page. I'm going to go back at a certain point and try to put topics next to them, which I haven't done yet. It's just a series of programs. But music has that medicinal quality, if you will, of being able to not only form, but also to heal and to be the balm. So,
and one thing, I've enjoyed the videos for a variety of reasons, and so have my children. One thing I would encourage, so if you're a parent listening, this might be something for you to consider. And if you're someone who works in a ministerial role and you're trying to equip the parents in your community, one of the things I found helpful about the conversations like you host, Jim, is that it models for me the language and the way to talk about some of these things when I don't know what the words are. So, the program you had on with a doctor from your community, to be able to talk about this, where not only could I see how you, someone who's trained working with children, talk about this, but I could see how she approaches it. That's super helpful. That's a lifeline for me as a parent. And back to your point, Jen, at the very beginning, where none of us are trained for this or equipped for this, and we're not alone, that really helps me. So I encourage everybody who's listening, whether it's the lunchtime concert, it's any of the other resources that we're talking about or pointing you towards, these can be helpful for children. They can also be helpful for us to know what to say. a little bit later, I'll show you some of the free resources that we're making available, including children's bulletins that give activities for children to complete, perhaps as you're attending or viewing a live stream liturgy. Not only are they helpful for children to have those activities, it's helpful for me to know how to discuss and explain these. So I think that's really important. We have some more questions that are coming in, and I want to get to some of those. What I want to do, though, is I want to use what we've been talking about to transition to another one of our big realities. And Jenna, if you would speak about this, what you mean about this looking for the sacramentality of the moment. How is this, domestic church reality, this being church at home, especially as a family, how is that opening up this concept of sacrament and sacramentality? So if you could frame that for us a little bit as we kind of go forward to discuss that more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw that question about, how do we engage the assembly virtually and children, by extension, but then also how is this changing our kids' long-term ideas about church and their place in it? And, we could look at this as a negative, or we could look at this as an opportunity. I see an opportunity here to form our young people in that church is not just the building that we go to on Sunday, 1 hour a week, to watch the priest say prayers and receive the holy bread. That church is the community, the body of Christ, and this pilgrim on a journey, and that means that they are church. And if church is not just a building we go to, then how are we church? And are we church by writing letters and cards to people in the nursing home? Are we church by calling up our relatives and checking on them? Are we church by, saying prayers together? So I think it's an opportunity for us to show our kids that church is not just the building, that church is us, and that we have a role as the body of Christ, as the body of believers, to be Christ. And that is really what church is. And that means that we don't have to be gathered in a building to do that. So it's a unique opportunity to kind of they reinforce the Vatican II theology of what church is for our young people, and to really challenge that church is not just the building. And then I think also, obviously, so much of our faith revolves around sacraments. The big S sacraments, and especially Eucharist. But we are little s sacramental people as well, because we're human, and we have senses, and we touch, and we taste, and we smell, and we hear. So it's an opportunity to maybe engage the everyday in our lives, to teach children about the big S sacraments in our church. Like when you're preparing dinner, you know how to do this already. Say to your child, wow, what does this look like? When we go to Mass, we prepare the food that we eat. Or when they're about to take a bath, hey, you know what? This reminds me of the time that you were baptized. Do you remember when, you don't remember when you're baptized, maybe you do, to talk about baptism. So to open up, oh, we're taking a walk, and, there's a crushed seed on the ground. Oh, Paschal mystery, it has to, die. And so I think all of these everyday opportunities, and give yourselves credit. Again, a lot more than you give yourself credit for, and you can do this. You can do this.
I want to. That's wonderful, and I want to interject, not to change the topic. So, Jim, if you want to jump in there, but I want to give people an example of, in addition to the great examples you gave, Jen, of what that might look like. So, I'm going to share my screen here really quickly. So, those of you who are watching should eventually see things change. And this is the GIA Publications homepage. So, this is giamusic.com, and you'll notice this slider here at the top, the second button here, Resources for Worship and Teaching at Home. If you access this, and hopefully, did my page just change? Yeah. Okay, great. So if you access this, what we've tried to provide is free and also things you can order, resources for parents and teachers, resources for pastors and music directors, resources just for our own personal prayer and development. And if you look at this, we have all kinds of examples of things that might help equip you to be able to have these conversations. Because I think what you just described, Jen, the looking for that sacramentality of moment to moment is wonderful. And I think of all kinds of ideas of what I could do, but I also might just need a little bit more help or structure there. And so we have resources, again, for faith formation for children and teens. And if you notice, there are all kinds of resources here with puzzles and games and things that that might work for younger children or middle school level children, other books and resources from Mickey McGrath, etc. And I want to show all of us one example of this just to see how this might work in the wild. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. We've made available for free throughout the Easter season children's bulletins, which is a great product from World Library. They're available in English and Spanish. So if you speak Spanish in your home, or if you have members in your community where Spanish is their primary home language, you can find these resources. But if you'll notice, this is the bulletin for this upcoming Sunday. And so there are all kinds of activities geared around this journey towards Emmaus, right? So you have a great activity here. If you scroll down further, there's a coloring page, which is great. And it's just not just for children, adults can color too. And if you notice, moving to this third page from place to place, really breaking open the scripture, what this does is it allows us to think about that journey to Emmaus and what's happening. So to find that sacrament of the moment, like you mentioned, Jen, of taking a walk and having a conversation and being aware of how is Jesus present in this conversation? Or even, this encourages us to look at all these other great scripture stories of journey, but maybe our family dinner conversation on Sunday is about our family visits or what it's like, when we journey towards, etc. I mean, there are ways that you can pull in your own family's experience to extend that conversation, to find that moment, to connect it back to faith and connect it back to the stories that we're hearing in the liturgical life. So a lot of questions of how do we connect to the liturgical life of our communities right now? It can be difficult to do that through a screen, but we can still connect to that lectionary cycle. We can still connect to the seasonal cycle that's happening also. So I wanted to just point to one particular resource that's available for free and another structure, picking up where you were, Jen. Jim, do you have any other examples or things that you could point to or discuss how you experience this, or would recommend we experience this sort of new sacramentality?
No, except, from a liturgist perspective, to really focus on those four presences, that we come to, which is that Christ is present, of course, in the Eucharist. He's present in the gathered assembly, in the presider, and then in the Word. What are ways that we can imagine the presence of Christ? And I think there's been almost a hyper focus on spiritual communion at this time, to when maybe even in the domestic church setting, can we focus on Christ's presence in the Word? And really sharing that word, making use of some of those resources. Christ present in Pope Francis would talk about in Laudato Si, Christ's presence in the created world, and on Earth Day today. What a great way to talk about that. But so I think it enables us as liturgists / parents / whatever role we have, of kind of opening our eyes up a little bit more to the presence of Christ in all these different manifestations, and not just not solely in the bread and the wine become the body and blood. So.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. So I want to hop in with a couple of the questions that are now taking us from this bigger, how do we talk about this? How do we think about a broader opportunity for sacramentality? And we can continue that conversation, of course. I want to go to one of the questions that we have been submitted through the Q&A. And again, as a reminder, if you're participating in this webinar live, at the bottom of your screen, that Q&A button, you can submit a question to us. So I want to go back to that first question and then variations of the questions that are here. When my kids are watching Mass through a live stream, it looks like their voices aren't necessary. What do I tell them? Or the next question also, what would be good ways to engage the assembly, especially children in the assembly, virtually in that active participation in Mass remotely? So again, from a child perspective, like how do we invite that type of participation if we're participating through a live stream, and how do we frame and contextualize that specifically for children?
Yeah, and some of this may involve the liturgical leaders of the parish, but one thing that we started doing this past weekend was encouraging people to have a bowl of water with them. And it's something where we can continue through the Easter season, that, the sprinkling rite, which is an option, of course, throughout the Easter season, that you encourage families to bless themselves with that water. Now a rubricist might say, well, that's not the blessed water of, but again, if our goal is full conscious active participation, then the norms are different right now on a certain level. I'm not encouraging breaking of norms, but so that sense of sacramentality can exist in a virtual way, if you will, like Jenn was talking about. So I would also, like I said, for pastoral musicians, encourage a little more of like a call and response type of song. I've been doing that with the lunch break sometimes, is I don't know if they're responding to me when I'm singing a call and response, and yet that's out there. So I think that's one element that would work as well. Jenn, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I think especially with younger children, engaging them in the preparation. So don't just pull them into the family room or, the living room or wherever your TV is and say, okay, sit down, it's time to watch Mass. But, maybe the evening before or half hour before, we're going to have Mass soon. Let's engage them in setting up an altar. Hey, we need something white. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be a bed sheet or a pillowcase or a napkin or, your hoarded paper towels, whatever you have, okay, let's find a Bible. What about a candle? Oh, we don't have a candle. Do you want to make a candle, or do you want to have a flashlight? I think that you could encourage the kids to say, oh, the priest is going to process. Would you like to be a part of the procession? Let's map a parade around our living room during the gathering song. We'll sing really loud during that. I think encouraging them to maybe teach them how to look up readings. These are the readings for today. Let's look them up. Let's read them beforehand. A lot of parishes are putting their worship aids online or putting the words on the screen. I think that's a great way. People aren't going to sing if they don't at least have the words in front of them. So, kudos to the parishes that are doing that for sure. Also, if there are links to the music, if the publishers have clips of them, people can learn the music beforehand or go back and sing it if it speaks to them, or they can buy it. But I think all those things, engaging your kids as much as possible in the preparation, will only deepen their participation during the liturgy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so two quick things that pop into my mind as you're talking about that, the both of you. I won't share my screen again and go back right now. I'll show it later. But back on the homepage for GIA, I showed you on the slider, and I just put in the comments also a link to that free resources for prayer and worship at home. We also have within this, and if you follow us, I encourage you, if you don't already, follow GIA on social media, especially Instagram and Facebook, to do so, because we've provided a lot of free prayer resources, structures for a home prayer service, a novena for peace and healing, special blessings, nighttime prayers, that can allow, again, a structure that have that music, have that text right there to equip you, that also link to Spotify playlists with music if you're not comfortable singing on your own or have misplaced your guitar. You can find resources that way. The other thing on our homepage, another slider, we have a special Share Our Song program right now, and this isn't meant to be the plug in the middle of the show, but we know music directors, it can be a lot of work to provide all of those worship aids. It can be a lot of work to promote that, but right now, if someone wishes to, you can direct them to our page to have a home copy of your hymnal or the Missalette or Celebremos or whatever worship resource you use. It can be really important to have that copy at home, not only to find those texts and those songs and those prayers, but also it gives you a tactile thing that connects you to that home experience. It even smells like the book does at church. It allows you to connect in a different way. And also, side promotion, if you purchase a hymnal, whatever hymnal resource or missalette resource your parish uses, right now we're giving 20% of that to your parish's music ministry to help support buying other resources, especially knowing that budgets are curtailed at this time. So I didn't want this to turn into the commercial in the middle, but as a matter of accessing these resources, sometimes people don't realize that you yourself can buy and have at home that hymnal that helps connect you to that experience. And then the other quick thing I want to mention, and maybe Jim, if you want to talk about this from the perspective of music director, as we continue to settle into this reality and plan our liturgies for the coming weekends that will be live streamed, keep in mind what it's like at home to participate in these liturgies, especially for families and children. So you mentioned already planning, music that perhaps is more call and response. I mean, any thoughts that come to mind for you if you're a pastoral musician who's watching? How can I create a music-friendly liturgy, knowing people might not have these things at home, and how can I equip this for maximum home family participation?
Yeah, and that becomes the struggle. What's interesting is kind of my trial run with this whole thing was when I was in Phoenix for 6 or 7 years, whatever it was. Our TV mass was televised. Our mass was televised throughout northern Arizona for much of the year live, and so you kind of got used to. If playing to that audience is not the greatest expression, but that. And one frustration I would continually have was that what would sound great in the church if we were doing, the Asparagus May, we're doing some Latin chant or something, sounded horrible on TV because of how it was picked up. So I do think there's a certain element of, as pastoral musicians right now, we're trained to or surround people with sound in the church. Well, that's a different forum now. And so really doing your best with the sound streaming that you can create an oral environment for people that's inviting. This past week, I know Jenn had commented, wow, it sounded better. We added more of an ambient sound. So it sounded a little more like church, if you will. So I mean, that is an important component, because if it feels like it's right in your face from a sound-wise, people probably aren't going to participate as much. It won't be as warm of an environment. Right. The other thing, though, is just familiarity of music. I think at this point, the songs, we did "You Are Mine" as a communion song this week. Now, is that a typical choice for the Easter season? I guess it could be, but there was a certain sense of the pastoral won out on that argument, that people needed something familiar, something that was ministering to them as they were participating. So I think familiarity, and so from a sonic perspective, from a familiarity perspective, and then based on how you can deliver it. If it's just piano and a vocalist, that's going to be different than what will work with your whole choir. Now is probably not the time to pull out the Palestrina. Same.
No, that's exactly right. Jenn, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I also think that something that a lot of us are not trained on is being on camera. And if you are a liturgical minister, especially liturgical musician or the cantor, you might be not always used to being front and center, but now, because there's nothing else to look at, suddenly you are. So I think when you're singing, I think it's really important to smile, to look right at the camera, and I would say to be a little more even physically expressive, or move a little bit more than you maybe normally are used to at most Catholic churches, because we're getting feedback that does help to engage. Your facial expression, your body language is almost just as important as what you're singing at this point. Whereas sometimes the choir is kind of off to the side or in the back and no one really sees them, so you can kind of look how you want and do what you want. Now suddenly it matters. I think that's important to realize, that if you're singing "This is the day," but you're like, "This is the day," this is like, it doesn't. You have to really pay attention to how you look as well.
Well, and I think that's wonderful. And an additional item there. This is not the conversation that I'm hoping to have right now. So this is not the question, but there have been a lot of conversation online, especially about the pros and cons of live stream liturgy, and what does that mean in terms of how we're framing our understanding of ordination or clerical state or sacraments or Eucharist, etc. And all of that aside, that's a different Homecoming Sunday conversation. I do think it's important, if your community is live streaming, whether it's prayer, if it's Eucharistic liturgy, whatever it is, from a children's developmental standpoint, it's really helpful for my children to see familiar faces and to see that familiar space that we can't be in, but that they long to be and that they miss. My kids will say, "Oh, there's our pew," or they'll see a different cantor and they'll remember when, that's their favorite cantor, or maybe not. But either way, they're connecting again with that familiar face. So I again, just in terms of importance for children and for the rest of us, I think those visuals are so important to remind us of those places that we miss. It helps remind us of what we're longing for. And if you are someone who's live streaming without going into a whole lot of other production or changing up what you found works, wherever you can, to be able to show the faces of the people who are there. If you have a cantor, you have someone at the keyboard or on the guitar, at some point show them, because it not only represents there are more people there than just the presider, but also it shows those familiar faces, and we miss them and we want to see them. And I think that's, again, helpful for children of all ages, really. You know?
Matt, and I want to say too, just from a catechetical standpoint, kind of outside of streaming liturgies, a very easy thing for ministers in the church, catechists, DREs, pastoral ministers, stewardship directors, all of these people, if you have a functional, smartphone and you can stream to Facebook, you could do a quick video standing in the gathering space of church, standing in the parking lot, like these familiar faces and spaces, not just inside the sanctuary, but also outside the sanctuary, I think is important it provides a sense of comfort, I think, for children and for adults. I think that they're missing some of their favorite places right now.
Yeah, absolutely. A real specific question that I want to make sure we get to while we have time. Right now, and again, this is going to depend on diocese and parish and part of the country. So for some of you, this will be a reality, and some of you, this won't be. But in many places, faith formation or sacramental prep has all but stopped as we're trying to figure out where do we put things that have been postponed, like confirmations or first communions, especially. So I'm wondering, for the two of you, how, if I'm, and I happen to be, the parent of a child who was supposed to, participate in First Communion, and in fact, in another 2 Sundays, how can I talk about that? What can I do right now? Any advice for us so we feel like we're still making progress and forming and helping our children grow in terms of their awareness and understanding of that sacrament?
Well, I'll jump in first, and then I'm sure Jen will have some stuff to add on that. I think, again, to acknowledge that it's loss. To acknowledge that if you, because we were supposed to have our, I think, Jen, 100 kids or something were going to receive their first Eucharist this Sunday at our liturgies, and then 2 weeks after that, another 100. And it is a sense of loss, and I think we need to give children that opportunity. There, kind of an aside, but related to that is one of my friends in Australia showed me this quadrant that he came up with, which was just like 4 boxes, and basically with a smiley face, with a sad face, with a worried face, and a question mark, and gave that to their children as a way to express, either through drawing or through, in fact, words, what they are happy about, what they're sad about, what they're worried about, and what questions they have. And so that could even be something that, I know you're going to have your first communion. How are you feeling about that? Maybe you want to draw me something about that. Meaning so that they can get some feelings out there, because just to pretend like, oh, they're not thinking about it, I don't think that's good. We need to acknowledge those feelings. So I think that's the first and the most important aspect. Jen, do you want to jump in on any of that? Or?
Yeah, our parish's first sacraments preparation looks less like classroom formation and more like mini retreats for the parents and the children. So we were able to take talks we had recorded before and guests we had recorded before and kind of splice together an at-home retreat for First Eucharist preparation. There's a foot washing ritual, there's a setting the table ritual. So we were able to do that because we have those resources. And I know other places, I know you guys are talking about, Matt, about doing some kind of perhaps First Eucharist online resource. I think, again, we are in a unique situation to teach our children what Eucharist is. That Eucharist is not only the presence that we receive in the host on Sundays, but that Eucharist is our entire act of from gathering to offering to praying to receiving and to going out. So even though we can't be doing that actual physical part, we can be doing the gathering as a domestic family around the table. We can be doing the offering and considering what our gifts are and how we're doing that. We can be fed by the word, still, and we can go out. How are we sent? So I think that, again, it's an important moment to really reclaim the teaching of Eucharist as not just this little round host that we receive on Sunday, but that our entire communal act of all that we are, offering all that we are, and receiving back all that God has for us, and then going out and sharing that with other people.
Yeah, and this Sunday is the story of the road to Emmaus, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and part of that retreat that Jenn was talking about is part of that is the story of the road to Emmaus, because that's such a central formative moment in Eucharist. I mean, in the Catechism, it's presented as one of the stories. And I know I've in fact done a teaching with the children on that road to Emmaus story, because it does talk about the four presences. They meet Christ on the road. He then tells through the prophets, tells the liturgy of the word in essence. He's invited to table, as we invite Christ to table with us, as the offering is placed. In that breaking of the bread, he's, quote, disappears from their presence and yet is in their heart. And then the most important part, in a way, is they go. They don't just go to sleep. They're sent forth and they run back to tell others about it. And so, I mean, even so, to take advantage of this weekend, not that most of us will be preaching, but it is to basically to share a great formative first Eucharist moment is this weekend, which does, and I just want to throw out there real quick, is in these times, do we need to take a second look at the Directory for Masses with Children and use some of that and some of the liberties it gives us when we're not gathered as a normal assembly? Can we make some more use of that? And we're talking about that here at St. Francis, but it would be up to a local ordinary, and yet there's opportunities there to do more to engage children.
I think all of that is wonderful. Thank you both for that, because I mean, again, my daughter is scheduled on May 3rd for their first communion, and it's not going to happen. And so this is something I know is important to a lot of people. And to me personally, I think, we're asking ourselves, like, what do we do to still mark that day? Knowing it's not what it was, knowing that we still have our faith formation to do and it's going to be rescheduled, but how do we still mark that day? To your point, Jenn, so we're still doing that formation. We're still developing our understanding of Eucharist. Also understanding from the developmental standpoint that in her mind, this is a real loss, to your point, Jim, to acknowledge that it might be something where we think, okay, great, we don't have to clean the house and have a bunch of pictures. But to her, this is obviously, and rightly so, a very major thing. And so I encourage any parents listening, if you are in that same situation, how are you going to still commemorate that day? And anyone who's in a position, pastoral ministry in a parish, what is your parish doing? Even if it's a simple message, if it's a simple video, if it's a phone call, a Zoom call with your faith formation class, whatever it might be, something to still mark the importance of that day, because it is important to the children who are going to be experiencing this, and it is a loss. And I agree with all of you. We would be well served to mark that, name it, claim it, as we go forward. I want to introduce, so we have two big things to do yet in 13 minutes or so to do. I have one other question that I want to make sure to get to, and then I'll address sort of as en masse some of the ones we didn't get to. And then we do want to talk about resource sharing. We want to point you to a mess of things that might be helpful for you and your family or the families that you serve. So this last question that's listed here. So my child has a social anxiety. So this time where social gatherings are impossible has actually been a bit of a blessing. So what tips do you have for reintegration back into community life, especially for children who have sensitivities like this?
Yeah, I mean, I am not an expert in that area at all, but we do have children in our parish who do have sensitivities and different anxieties. I would encourage you to reach out to your faith formation director or your pastor to come up with a plan. Much like in classrooms, there are individualized plans for children. We've encountered children. We have one child who has an aversion to water. and has never been baptized because of that. So we've been working with that family to figure out on that child's timeline and when it's right for him, how we can help him receive his sacraments in a non-anxiety inducing way. So, every child is so different. I'm hopeful that we're not going to just be sent back to church, that gatherings will probably gradually increase in size as society starts reopening. I've encouraged families who maybe cannot get to Sunday Mass because their child is overwhelmed to try maybe a daily Mass first to get used to that. Maybe to sit down with the priest one-on-one and talk about what's going to happen. Maybe draw out like a visual roadmap for your child. Now we're so to set the expectations so there's no surprises, and to kind of mark on the map, it's going to get loud now. If you have noise canceling headphones, that would be the time to put it on. Or it's going to be overwhelming now. Let's have an activity plan to kind of distract you while this is going on. So I think a visual roadmap, especially for a younger child, to be clear, to have them have their expectations, be clear about what's going to happen, I think helps that a lot. But every child is so different. So I would encourage parents, your children best, to reach out one-on-one to a faith formation director, to a pastor, to try to develop an individualized plan.
No, that's great. That's wonderful. I know we're running close to the end of time, and we do want to talk about resources and things. I want to just read you quickly. Some of you are posting questions that unfortunately we're not going to get to in this conversation, but I want to remind everybody that the purpose of this series of Homecoming Sunday is to host a variety of conversational topics. So some of you are asking about, how do we talk to our kids about questions like, why is God allowing this to happen? This Friday, we'll be joined by Sue Garthwaite, who's a spiritual director, who will be exploring how do we think about or explore spiritual questions like that in this time. So if we don't get to it now, there hopefully is a conversation coming up, and these are all free. You can register for all of these. We hope you'll come back to more. So I want to make sure that, again, if we don't get to these here, we'll get to in another conversation. Some of you asking conversations about what do I do to host virtual choir practice? How do I get people together digitally? We have conversations about that are going to be coming up. What type of, how do we plan? What type of resources are going to be developed to imagine that first liturgy back? Again, we have more conversations that are coming up, and we'll be announcing those through social media. So please look out for those. If we don't get to those today, we will certainly get to them in the future. Christian Lianos just asked the question, we're considering using an online catechesis program during COVID-19, heard pros and cons. Any thoughts or suggestions? Maybe we could package this with the resource topic. If we're looking, places are looking at beginning catechetical programs in a virtual environment, do either of you know of resources that are digital that you might suggest to people?
Right now our parish is doing small group faith formation for all ages, K to 12. So what we are looking at in a possible virtual future is a Zoom and small group breakouts with small group leaders. As far as digital resources, we use Flaum Gospel Weeklies, and I think you can get those digitally. And then our faith formation director actually writes curriculum for 3 different stages of elementary, with games and things like that, pulling from a number of resources. So I don't know anything that is an all-in-one out there right now. You might have to do some kind of Frankenstein catechetical programming to get this off the ground in September. Yeah.
Anything that you want to add to that, Jim?
No, I mean, no, and I think she's right. It's a little bit of the hodgepodge. I don't know of a graded catechetical program right now for kids that's online. I mean, obviously there's other resources, but I would just come from the perspective too that it's that depending on the age, depending on where they are developmentally, it's that sense of experience, that sense of acknowledging the loss, that sense of trying to continue to form on the liturgy that will have a primary role for them. I do think if streaming is happening in the parish, I think it allows us, as from a catechetical perspective, to focus on different things. Like this last week, in one of my lunch breaks, we talked about hands, and really focusing on the role of hands in the Eucharistic prayer. which normally you may not be able to see too much of, but right now you can see more of. So can you talk about children like, if we're doing the epiclesis, you don't need to use that word, but, we're calling down the Holy Spirit now. Father's hands are showing that we're all calling down the Holy Spirit. I mean, I do think it provides us more opportunities to do things like that. So.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen one more time because, again, I want to be able to show you some of these things that we are excited about to point you towards that might help equip you or the members of your community, or if you're a grandparent or somebody else who might benefit from this, if you would please share it with them. So in the chat feature, I put a link to this page. You can also access it through the homepage at GIA, so giamusic.com. Resources for worship and teaching at home. Again, we have a variety of categories. So some things, especially parents and teachers, that are pertinent to this conversation, but also other resources by category: pastors, music directors, personal prayer development. Did my screen just switch?
Yes, it did.
Okay, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I know Butterfly Music, so Andrew Chin, who's another great GIA and World Library artist, has a YouTube channel where he's doing these shows for children from Australia. A lot of information on this website for, again, music for children, appropriate for children. You can find him here at this address, butterflymusic.com.au. I also want to point out we have a shared drive that we have linked both on our social media page through the free resources page. You can see at the top here, by Sunday, there's scripture. So we have free pages from some of our prayer resources. So I'll go to this coming Sunday, for example. You can see Living the Word, the third Sunday of Easter, that has all of the scripture readings plus reflections. We have the Children's Bulletin, which I showed you earlier, Somos Católicos, so the same thing, but in Spanish. So you have that for members of your community. We also have a variety of other resources: Nighttime Prayer for Children, a beautiful little prayer service that Kate Williams, Senior Managing Editor, has written with music, gives you the language. If you're not familiar, if you're not comfortable just praying off the cuff as a parent or leading this prayer, it's everything you would need for nighttime prayer. To, again, Liturgy of the Hours is a wonderful opportunity to bring ritual prayer, liturgical prayer, these everyday sacramentality into our homes. So there's something there. This Novena for Peace and Healing, again, from Kate Williams. She and Peter Kolar led this. So there are videos of each of these 9 sessions on our Facebook page. Prayer with Loved Ones When We Are Apart. This is a beautiful prayer service. Again, you can download it for free. You can do a Zoom call or a FaceTime call with grandma and grandpa, or with cousins who are across the country. You can't get together for that camping trip, but you could still pray together in a way, or people just down the street, classmates and families that you can't see. A bunch of other music that's been written by artists that are coming through, so we're really excited to share that with you. And then I want to stop share. I'm going to start share again. If you are not familiar with Spotify, ask your child. But I want to show in particular these resources. And Jim, if you would share something about the Catholic Classroom Collection. These you can access by category, but also by level, a variety of music. So you want to say something about this project here in the last couple of minutes, Jim?
Yeah, this was a project I did with World Library a few years ago, and it's online music. But really, it's from the World Library catalog of children's artists, and it's by level. So there's early kind of pre-K, if you will. There's early elementary, there's elementary, and then there's middle school. So those 4 different developmental areas. And then we broke it down by pillars of the catechism, really. There's walking and talking, which is kind of prayer and living, moral living. And then also celebrating believing, which is creed and worship. So it's in those, they're classified into those different settings. So obviously then catechetical components as well as liturgical music will be in there, but it is by grade level or by developmental level. So it's just something that we designed for Catholic classrooms, if you will, but it can be used at home. Much of the music is also available via songbook and such, although not particular to those collections, but you can get much of the music. Andrew's music, my music, Michael Mangan, as well as several others. And then moving into like as you get into the middle school, a little more John and Gotti, Danielle Rose and such.
Absolutely. And again, we'll send a follow-up email to everybody after this. If you are listening to this after the initial broadcast, so you're watching the archive video of this, if you email me, Matt, M-A-T-T-R, at giamusic.com, I'd be happy to send you that list of resources that we've mentioned throughout this. I know Jen also has some additional organizations that you sent me links towards that I will include in that list. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has wonderful resources for us as adults, for members of our community, also ways to equip parents to speak with children. NFCYM, the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, has wonderful resources. Other things, again, from your parish, St. Francis Raleigh, and other individual presenters will include all of that there. I'll give you each a moment here for sort of final thought or sign off. Also, I'll include contact information both for Jim and for Jen in case you have particular questions where you want to reach them. Again, looking for moments for everyday sacramentality is huge. Again, thinking about how do we name and claim this as a moment of loss, and yes, as opportunity to be domestic church. That'll be another topic of conversation coming up for us in Homecoming Sunday series. But how do we name and claim that as opportunity? But how do we acknowledge loss, especially with children who have all of the same emotions and feelings we do and need those to be named and claimed and processed as well. And then most importantly, none of us are trained for this. Everything is going to be fine. You are doing a wonderful job, and we're more than happy to help provide the resources and conversations that are important to you all. So if you know of other conversations that would be important, please let us know. Please continue to look for these other conversations, these Homecoming Sunday series. Please sign up for them. You can take them all. Please do, and share them with members of your community. Jim, Jen, any final thoughts here before we sign off and say goodbye?
I mean, no, Max Johnson used to always say, always answer a Paschal mystery if you didn't know the answer to anything. But I think that really becomes it right now, which is, every moment of every day provides us with Paschal mysteries. So even though, like right now, as a church worldwide, we're experiencing loss, on any given Sunday, there's people that are experiencing loss and there's people right now who are experiencing joy, and that hasn't changed, even though the numbers may have shifted a little bit. So I think we still have to go in there preaching and teaching and celebrating Paschal mystery with children and with adults, and just being open to that. So.
And, Matt, I just want to say there's a great book out there called Start with Jesus by Julianne Stans. And I really think that parents, pastors, ministers that are struggling out there, if you're stressed out, start with Jesus. Love the person in front of you. Do the next right thing. I think that's from Frozen too. Parents, if you're stressed and you're like, I can't deal with my kids' spirituality and work and homeschool, just love your child. That is how they will fundamentally experience the love of God. Do that first. Everything else is kind of secondary. Start with Jesus. Jesus fed people, healed people, let them rest when they needed to. And start there. And then do the rest as you can.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for participating and joining us. Jim, Jen, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, our first conversation. We'll look for all of you in another Homecoming Sunday series. Again, if you have questions, please send them in. Please look for this to be posted on Facebook. You can join the conversation in the comments there. But we really appreciate you all being together with us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week until we can be together once again. God bless.
Thank you.